Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I'm going to interview Andy Fairie. Now, Andy is a former police officer, started in the West Midlands, concluded in Police Scotland. He's now a published author and works with CBT. Have I got that right?
Yep.
There you go.
All the letters and in the right order.
Well, there you go. The trouble is, and you'll know this, when you've got somebody on, I don't Google people. I've looked at your LinkedIn profile. I don't Google people because I think that spoils the surprise. Yeah. So this is your opportunity to tell me all about you and your brilliant podcast.
Yeah, where shall I start?
Well, that's a very good point. Let's start at the very beginning. Where did it all start for you, Andy, and what was your inspiration to join the police service?
Well, two influences. The first was my dad's best friend was a chap called Graham Pearson, and he was, when we first met him, a detective sergeant in Strathclyde Police. And I was obsessed with Graham and his stories as a child, and I now realise I probably plagued him to within an inch of his life. But to be fair to Graham, he never said go away and he never stopped telling the stories. So, and he had a great career. He eventually he was Assistant Chief Constable, he became Director General of the Scottish Crime and Drugs Enforcement Agency. So the stories just kept getting better and better over the years. So there was that positive influence. I think the second factor was, as a student in Cheltenham, drunken night out, my mate pinched that house for sale sign, as you do, and we ended up getting arrested for it.
Fantastic.
And, well, it was eye-opening. And I was fascinated by the whole procedure. And what I saw as the fairness of it, they took all my stuff off me and wrote down what it was and sealed it, and then made sure I got that back at the end. And there was tape-recorded interviews. So I was fascinated by the fairness of it, but also, the police obviously saw it for what it was, which was a stupid, drunken student prank.
Yeah.
And dealt with it accordingly. And we got a caution. But I remember thinking at the time, I want to be part of this. So fast forward 4 years or so, and eventually got a degree in engineering from Birmingham University. But went back to the stories that Graham had told me and decided, right, I really want to join the police, and joined West Midlands Police and got sent to Coventry, where I'd never been before in my life.
Fantastic. Why didn't you go straight to a Scottish force?
I'd been living in the Midlands for about 5-6 years at that point, and I'd been a student in Birmingham for 4 years, and I liked living in Birmingham and kind of thought I would settle there. Policing wise, Coventry is a great place to be a police officer. It got a little bit of everything. Busy force. You got a good variety of stuff as well, because we had within the city, quite a diverse range of communities and incomes, from very high to very low. So you got a good variety and you got exposed to a lot. But yeah, after about 6 years, as much as I was enjoying work, I just found myself returning back to home, Glasgow, more and more often, and staying longer and rekindling old friendships. So at 6 years service, transferred to what was then Strathclyde Police.
Was he in Learmonth there then?
No, he was. Yes, he was. He wasn't. I got promoted. Interestingly enough, when I got promoted to sergeant, I was given the task, absolutely great job of looking after uniform and protective equipment, and that came under his portfolio. So I had quite a lot of dealings with him, and yeah, actually I kind of liked him as a decision maker and leader, and certainly a lot of the decisions and support I got in terms of uniform and protective equipment, I thought he was in the right place. Because did he go on to back to Essex. I think he'd come from Essex.
He came back down here, and then he became Chief Constable of Kent.
That's it, yeah.
He's a proper Essex boy. He was a dog handler here and what have you.
Yeah.
When you joined the police, where did you go for your training?
So I went to Ryton, which is just outside Coventry.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I actually, because I'd been a student for 4 years by that point, living away from home, you know, the concept of going somewhere else and living away from home and studying wasn't too much of a culture shock. I have to say, I kind of took to it. Yeah, I took to it like a duck to water, really.
And the food was probably just as good as the food that you were knocking up in the student accommodation.
Oh, well, no.
I was being sarcastic then.
The food as a student was never as bad as it was at Ryton.
Ryton, no, absolutely. But what was that like as a university student? Because we're talking, what year was that? 92, somewhere around there? You would have been in the minority then, because a lot of people wouldn't have had degrees going into the police service, where now it's almost encouraged. Plus, dare I say it, you come from a generation where not everybody went to university. Now everyone goes to further education. What was that like into the police as a university student?
I mean, it wasn't. I think probably. So I think on our intake for West Midlands, because I remember they did ask you on the day, right? Put your hands up if you've got a degree. Put your hands up if you've got A levels. Put your hands up if you've got nothing. And there were, you know, I think about 30% had a degree or had been at university, college. About, you know, half a dozen out of about, it must have been about 30, 40 had, you know, O levels or less.
Yeah.
And certainly when I arrived on my shift in Coventry, I think maybe about, that's probably a similar sort of level, maybe about 40% had some sort of college, tertiary education behind them. So I wasn't, you know, a mold breaker in that respect. I think the mold was breaking. And you know what, I think it gave me an advantage, you know, certainly you get used to that kind of studying and remembering chunks of legislation.
Yeah.
So that came fairly easily and let me focus on the other kind of softer skill kind of side of things. You know, it's interesting because we have this sort of more recent debate around, you know, I think the College of Policing would prefer it if everyone, certainly in England and Wales, had a degree before joining the police.
Yeah.
Which I think is, you know, I think it's a real one of the strengths of the police service in the UK is that it reflects society as a whole.
Absolutely.
You know, we are the police, and the people are the police, and the police are the people.
Yeah.
Going back to Peelian principles, and you know what, I think our intake needs to reflect that. Interestingly enough, there's no move whatsoever I can see in Scotland to move to that. Everyone has to have a degree before they join the police. And I don't see a big difference in outcomes for the public in Scotland or England and Wales. Now, I do see, you know, I see a lot of stuff on LinkedIn and stuff like that from academics saying we need more degree educated people in policing. I don't disagree with that, but I don't see any evidence that it produces better outcomes. And I would certainly say we need to have the people there who have come from other routes.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, maybe going straight from school into, for example, the military, and then come out of the military and join the police. You know, putting barriers in their way, I don't think helps anyone.
But you see, the big drive for policing is inclusivity. Okay, get that, and I think that's absolutely right. You know, it should reflect the public. But there are so many great people that don't have a degree that would be ideal on a shift. That, you know, I've got a friend who retired as a chief superintendent, and he had an O level in metalwork, right. and a better leader you would not wish to meet. You know, he was absolutely brilliant, dynamic, forward thinking. He was, you know, good in a scrap, everything that you needed, good thief taker, everything that you needed. And he had an O level in metalwork. And policing hasn't changed that dramatically. That means that he needs to have a degree in physics.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree.
And that's the thing. What was the highlight of working in Coventry? As you say, the diverse culture, the two-tone culture, which I absolutely love, all the great things that have, and of course, we're talking about a time that's 50 years after the Second World War, and because Coventry got absolutely annihilated, so you've got a huge population that would have remembered those types of things.
Yeah, and if you go round about Coventry to the sort of towns that are on the outskirts, like Kenilworth, Warwick, Leamington Spa, they're lovely, beautiful Georgian architecture, if not older. And you think this is nice. And then you go to Coventry and you realise that was probably what Coventry was like before the war.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, after the war, it was kind of the initial sort of project for working out how to build inner cities.
Yeah.
Strange enough, my uncle was a sort of town planner for Peterborough.
Oh, okay.
And he boasts about Peterborough. He loves Peterborough. If you're ever with him, he'll sit and tell you all about where the estates are, and the shops are, and the roundabouts, and the roads that link them. Very proud of it. But he cut his teeth in Coventry, and he doesn't say a lot about Coventry. You know. So yeah, you've got all that post-war housing and infrastructure. Like I say, I mean, which gives you your volume crime. And I suppose I don't have any particular incident, Paul, but what I do remember from my time in Coventry, I mean, there was a lot of volume crime in terms of stolen cars, burglaries, in order to fund drug habits. But when, so for example, on a night shift, you could guarantee you, if you're doing a week of night shifts, at least once during that night shift, you'd get behind a stolen car, or you'd be running through back gardens chasing after burglars. And, it was that kind of cops and robbers kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Fast forward 25, 30 years, night shifts for cops are largely domestic incidents, mental health calls, sitting at hospital, watching prisoners in cells, and that kind of, I think, if you like, the fun, the cops and robbers aspect of it is largely disappeared, which is a shame.
It's a huge shame, because those crimes that you said about earlier on are still taking place. They haven't gone away, but they haven't got the volume of police officers to actually deal with those now, which then causes an additional problem in society. But yeah, and you're quite right, the mental health aspect is overwhelming now for police service.
Yeah, and you make a good point. And unfortunately, Police Scotland, because it's really struggling at the moment with resources, it's now introducing policies that were adopted in England about 10 years ago, where if there were no obvious lines of inquiry at the outset, then the police wouldn't attend. They would take a report over the phone, and that would be the end of it. And I can understand, you've got to work with the resources that you've got, but it is a retrograde step, because, if I get my shed broken into, and there's nothing there for forensics, neighbour's not seen anything, no CCTV, I know it's not going to get solved. But at least, a police officer coming and spending 10 minutes just lets me know that someone cares about the fact I've been broken into. But it helps out organisational knowledge. So going back to my days in Coventry, every time there was a burglary, a theft of car, or a prisoner, you came into the muster room and you wrote it down on a rolling log that was updated every 24 hours.
Yeah.
And when you started your shift, you came in, and whilst you wait for everyone else, you picked that log up and you read it, and you realised, also because you were going to the reports of the sheds getting broken into, you realised, right, okay, on nights in the main street, there's sheds getting broken into. So on nights, I'll be in the main street, and that's where your prisoners would come from. And I think we lose that organisational knowledge with, that whole, if there's no lines of inquiry, we're just going to take a report over the phone and we'll leave it at that, because that then doesn't get fed back into where the cops need to be to catch the bad people.
Absolutely. And I encourage everybody to report whatever.
Yeah.
Irrespective. I mean, how many times do you see on social media people trying car door handles, for instance?
Mm-hmm.
The police don't read social media.
No.
People need to phone up and say, I know no one's going to find them, but someone was trying to door handles in this street last night, because that will link into something else, and all of a sudden the police can build an analytical pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And dare I say it, as a district commander, the last thing you want is a phone call from the chief constable to say you've had an increase of crime in your area.
Yeah.
Or of incidents, but if the police don't know, they can't deal with it.
Yeah, I always say to people like yourself, report stuff, and the first to admit, when you report it, you may well not get the response from the police that you were hoping for. But yeah. I can absolutely guarantee that if you don't tell the police about it, the police will do nothing about it.
Absolutely right. What was it like when you moved up to Scotland? You're going home at this point. I mean, that's how was that? How were you received by your colleagues in Strathclyde?
Well, yeah. So having had the mickey taken out of me at Coventry for having a Scottish accent, I then got the mickey taken out of me in Glasgow for having an English accent.
Right.
It was fine. I mean, I had to go back and go back to the Scottish Police College and do the probationary training there. 12 weeks of great food there. I suppose that big differences between a lot similar between England and Scotland, especially when it comes to sort of like just the basics of dealing with people, but a lot of difference as well. So in Scotland, whereas in Coventry the main drug at the time was cannabis, in Glasgow the main drug was heroin.
Yeah. In
Coventry we were getting roughly 2 or 3 murders a year. In Glasgow we were getting 1 a month. And in Coventry, actually, it tended to be drug-related crime involving the murders. In Glasgow, it was largely gangs of youths meeting up on patches of derelict land for what they would call a square go, a huge fight, and they would just bring anything they could lay their hands on in terms of weapons. And yeah, roughly once a month, they would just get completely out of hand and people would die. Also quite a big one big difference, almost from the moment, in fact, from before I finished my probation, I was driving and I was largely single crewed most of the time in Coventry. In Scotland, there's laws regarding corroboration, so evidence is inadmissible at court if it's not corroborated by another source.
Right.
So that tends to lead to a double crewed patrolling model for most, not everyone, but for most. But also the procedures were a lot swifter at the time. So whereas in Coventry, if you got a prisoner, that would be you written off for the whole of your shift. And even if a prisoner committed an offence in front of you, you were still going to have to tape interview that prisoner.
Right.
In Scotland, very little taped interviewing went on. And, someone would commit a breach of the peace in front of you, you would arrest them, take them to the cells. It would take me 1.5 to 2 hours to do the crime report and the associated case, and then be back out on the street. So it was quite swift that way. It kind of lost it over the years. We sort of eventually caught up with the whole pace model and introduced our own version. And yeah, now if you arrest someone, you're kind of off for the whole of your shift. But yeah, so it was a lot similar. There's quite a bit that was different as well. Because
when you first joined Strathclyde, I might be wrong here, but was there a period where you didn't have to give a suspect a lawyer within a certain period of time?
So to put this in context, under PACE, if you get arrested, you're entitled to have a consultation with a lawyer.
Yeah.
Which would usually take place at the police office, and the lawyer would make a decision and probably always sitting on the interview. In Scotland, at the time, your rights were to have a lawyer informed of your arrest, right. But you had no right of consultation with that lawyer. To be fair, the lawyers weren't that keen on coming out at 3 or 4 in the morning to speak to their clients. But yeah, so yeah, you had no right of consultation whilst you're in custody, and you had no right to have a lawyer present during an interview.
Right.
Um, but we never really took advantage of that at the time, and we interviewed a tiny percentage, I would say probably 10% or less, and generally interviewing, you had to be trained to do it, and it was generally only CID officers, and you would struggle usually to find a CID officer that would be interested in doing an interview for you. So we didn't interview a lot of people. Over the years, it has changed. So now, if you are arrested, you are entitled to have a consultation, and you are entitled to have a lawyer present in interview. Generally, what has happened is that consultation will take place by phone, and the solicitor will tell the client, go no comment. You interview them, they go no comment. So.
Yeah. Where did you actually work in Glasgow? Was there a particular area that you were assigned to?
So I worked initially in the East End, the north of Glasgow, an area called Baird Street, which is a tiny area. It's only about 5 square miles. Area of high deprivation, a lot of drugs, a lot of drug crime associated with it. And I kind of that kind of area in the East End of Glasgow were kind of like rubber band areas for me wherever I went in my service. So I did bits in Argyll, I did like corporate jobs as well. I would always return there. And difficult, hard areas to live in. There's no getting away from it. High levels of deprivation, a lot of crime, a lot of violent crime. You know, when I joined, the Strathclyde's Violence Reduction Unit was getting set up, and you know, beginning to sort of try and take a longer term health strategy kind of view of violent crime, which, you know, gave huge results in terms of outcomes, but not getting away from it, also backed up by tremendously high levels of stop and search to sort of deal with that sort of weapon carrying drugs crime problem.
Was it an area known for sectarianism? Because Glasgow, with the Celtic Rangers element, the sectarianism that's wrapped around football up there, which is, you know, we have our violence here, but it just seems a bit strange, if I'm perfectly honest with you. It says a bloke who supports West Ham and has done all his life and has seen all sorts of violence take place. But what was that like for you as a police officer, the old firm stuff?
So the north and the east are very much Celtic areas, Parkheads, you know, in the East End of Glasgow, and very much the south are Rangers areas. So you're constantly aware of it. Where do you go with it? You know what? It just becomes a bit like the background noise, and you become very desensitized to it, which is a terrible thing. I mean, just to give you, I do feel that, you know, there is an issue there for particularly West of Scotland society as a whole. I could never understand when I was growing up why I had to walk half an hour to school when there was literally a school I could see from my bedroom window, which was a Protestant school, but for some reason I had to walk to school half an hour down the road. And because you're separating kids at that early stage, it doesn't happen. I mean, I know it happens in England, but it's much more emphasised in the west of Scotland, because you're separating kids at such an early stage and essentially highlighting the differences between them. It really does come out. To be fair, I've probably become immune to it over the years and desensitized to it. We were quite good at knocking the sectarian related or football related violence on the head for quite a while. What also happened, Rangers were fiddling the books, for want of a better phrase, and they got sent down to the third division. So for a long time, there weren't any Celtic Rangers matches. So that took a lot of the heat out of it. Rangers are back there now. And you can see that the football related violence and the influence of kind of the ultra supporter sort of thing from Europe coming in. You can see that violence is becoming a lot more organised, a lot more nasty as well.
Yeah, I mean, my family are from Galway, and you know, I've always been a Celtic fan.
Yep.
But I don't sort of follow them anymore because he's so aggressive, so aggressive. I mean, even Rod Stewart said that he's not going to go back up there. I understand. I was reading the other day that he'd got the ump and he's a massive Celtic fan.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's part of life. And the problem that we have, if you're working in the areas of social deprivation, if the only escapism that they've got is their local football team, then that's the way they're going to go, and their passion and their drive is always going to be down that route. So
and people want to belong to something. So you know, you belong to the tribe, and if the tribe in your area is Catholic Celtic support, and that's a tribe you join, and we have a tribe, we have a school for that tribe and a school for this tribe, and that's how you'll grow up. And then we wonder why when people come out of school, they suddenly look on others in a different way. And you know, we're kind of getting it as well. At the moment, Police Scotland's having a real hard time with other areas of hate crime. It's just kind of amended its hate crime legislation, and it's getting an absolute Police Scotland didn't ask for it, but unfortunately Police Scotland are bearing the brunt of every idiot who's offended by something on TikTok about their disability or transgender status, and so phone up the police and complain about it.
How do you feel about it being Police Scotland? Because beforehand you had, your different police forces. How do you feel about the amalgamation?
I was really keen to have an amalgamation. So to give you a bit of background, there were 8 police forces. Strathclyde was the biggest. It had 50% of Scotland's officers, covering 50% of the population, and the other 7 forces covered the other 50%.
Right.
Now I mentioned I was looking after uniform and protective equipment for Strathclyde, and one of my tasks was to try and work with the other forces to try and get a common uniform for the whole of Scotland, and that was a absolute nightmare. And you could quite obviously, I would come in with something, and I would present evidence, say, right, Strathclyde officers have been surveyed and they want pockets on the side of trousers, and I've done that in some other force areas, and overwhelmingly throughout Scotland, 80% of officers want pockets on the side of trousers, and the answer from the other forces would simply be, well, we're not doing the Strathclyde thing. Even if it's what cops want, we're not doing that, so no. And after a while, I thought, we're talking here about pockets on the side of trousers. How are forces going to work together to deal with serious organised crime groups, violence, domestic violence across the country? And we had 8 different IT systems, 8 different intelligence systems. So from that point on, I thought, hell, Menji, it's time to move over to a national force. It was easier for Strathclyde because we were the biggest force. A lot of forces saw it as being a takeover by Strathclyde of all the other forces. We had Strathclyde's chief constable was Stephen House.
Yes.
Who'd come up from the Met to a mixed reception, but he got the job of being the chief constable of Police Scotland, and I don't think that he wasn't the sort of past chief that would bother about winning hearts and minds. That wasn't his approach.
No, he hasn't changed.
No. Yeah, you know what? Somebody did make the point to me that when you're changing something, you have to break apart what's already in place and then rebuild it. And Stevie House was the absolute right person to break it apart, because he wouldn't take any other way than his, which was, we're breaking this apart and we're putting it back together. But he was never going to be the person to put it back together. So I'm I've got mixed views on Stephen House and his time as chief constable there. But it was a pretty torturous process, and quite a lot of resentment from other forces at the time.
When Stephen House left, who was he replaced by?
He was replaced by Phil Gormley,
Right.
who had come up from, I can't remember, he was an English chief constable. He came up to Scotland. He wasn't here long, and left amid a series of allegations of bullying from the one thing from different levels of the organisation. So I know there were federated members, superintendents, police staff members, and part of the senior executive team that were all making complaints about him.
Oh.
And he left before that. Didn't stop him then getting another job in England. It always sort of does make me aware, because Stephen House left under quite the clouds regarding stop search figures, and there was an incident where 2 people died following a road accident that wasn't dealt with at all well. But it does make me wonder, see when they're sitting down for their job interview afterwards, do people not ask them what happened in your last job?
Or do they not read the papers? Because you're talking about a very high-profile incident. I mean, the fatal collision where the 2 people died.
Yeah.
I know you got a lot of criticism for that, but and I suppose if you're the manager of a football team and your team loses, or that you have to fall on the sword. But there's some things that you've got no real control of. Certainly when a force covers an entire nation.
Yeah.
And, but they are. But you see it all the time. You see it all the time. People that have gone out of organisations under a cloud, and then they've gone on to be the director of something, whatever, something poll. And you think, has nobody actually Googled this individual, or is it your best friend that's sitting on the panel to give you the job? But that's the cynical side of me. What were the highlights, though, of working within Strathclyde before it went over to Police Scotland?
Well, that's a good question. I suppose I got promoted to sergeant during that time. And as I say, I had a great job looking after uniform and protective equipment. And I was able to kickstart a couple of bits of equipment for officers that I was then able to, when I got back onto the street, to use and think, that's actually quite a good bit of kit, and they're still getting used today. So I'm quite pleased about that. That's very much a high. It's what also started me on that whole route of communication skills for police officers, because it's great giving cops pieces of kit, but ideally you want them to avoid having to use that kit in the first place, and generally the first sort of protocol in reducing the conflict in any situation is that whole communication skills. So that was a highlight. In terms of operationally, things like there's where we're in Strathclyde. I'm trying to remember, it was just that whole Strathclyde, and particularly Glasgow, in the north and east end of Glasgow, they were just high volume environments. I would work in the east end of Glasgow as a sergeant, and occasionally you would get sent to another part of the force to help because they were short of sergeants. And when you would turn up, the sergeants would say, yeah, everyone thinks it's quite quiet here, but occasionally we have our moments. And I would be thinking, yeah, but the East End of Glasgow is just 24/7 moments. It's all moments. If you got to your morning meeting on an early shift and there'd only been 1 or 2 stabbings, you were thinking it's probably going to turn out to be quite a good day. And eventually that kind of just washes over you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of thinking of the highlights, and you become desensitized very much to that whole.
Yeah, but you're talking about an era where Train Spotting was one of the major movies at the time, and I wonder how much that reflected on Scottish society, certainly that part of Glasgow.
Very much. I mean, Train Spotting obviously was based in Edinburgh as opposed to Glasgow, but almost identical in terms of that just completely ever-present harm being done by drugs. And, unfortunately, particularly in Glasgow, the drug death rate has just climbed and climbed and climbed year on year on year on. And it's that, that's the real harm in it, and it's the families that are left behind. The kids of parents who have died through drug use or whatever. Just that cycle continues. And I can't really put my finger on why it happens and doesn't happen in other parts of the UK, and what the answers are to it. Police officers are now carrying naloxone to help deal with the initial response to an overdose. There are literally at the moment building rooms that you can go to in Glasgow and consume drugs and do it in a safe environment. So we'll see what that means. I suppose if I had to say one thing about it, well, first of all, we call it the war on drugs, don't we? I've never known a war but we always talk about just focusing on suppliers of drugs. Well, I've never known a war that you win by only shooting generals. And we don't want to put the resources in to deal with drug use at a personal level. So we've kind of stopped doing that. But until we kind of up our game in terms of the resources and get a clearer picture of what we want to enforce and not enforce, and make that quite clear and accept the consequences. If we want to decriminalise cannabis, for example, fine. But let's be prepared for all that induced psychosis that comes along with it.
Yeah.
So it's hard areas to live, and kind of not really getting any respite from it.
I get the argument about legalisation. I do get, but there's an intrinsic link between drug use at the low level and the low level petty crimes. And as the use increases, so does the crime.
Yeah. So very much so.
But that seems to be lost on some campaigners. I get it. Everyone's got their right to view and their opinion, but as a grumpy old copper, that's how I see it. And even if we dealt with social deprivation and gave every person there the money to support themselves and go, they will still find something else to go and commit crime for. And the reason, years ago when we used to have Ford Escorts broken into to nick the radios were being swapped for a piece of cannabis or speed or whatever it may be. And it's just a circle, and it's generational. There'll be kids in my hometown where and now they're probably dealing with their great grandparents because they're having their kids so early, but it's just something that becomes accepted in their society. But I do feel that there are kids out there that want to break the cycle. It's how do we identify those kids and give them the opportunities to break the cycle? Because unless we take them out of that situation, they're just going to step into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite.
And it's a terrible, terrible shame. When Police Scotland becomes one, when police, did you move away from Glasgow, or did you do all your policing there?
No. So I actually, before Police Scotland became one, I actually went from Glasgow to Argyll. So I did they would every summer in Argyll, which is, rural Scotland.
Yeah.
They would offer a 5 or 6 month contract on some of the islands, or placement on the islands. So I got posted to the Isle of Tiree. It's an absolutely beautiful island, 40 miles off the coast of Oban. Ferries 4 hours.
Wow.
One officer there throughout the year. And during the summer, the population expands from something like 700 to 3,000. So they would send over another cop. And that was me. I volunteered for it for just over 5 months. And, I have to say, absolutely great experience, island policing. I maintain it as the remotest policing post in the UK, particularly when you're on your own, because whilst I'm there during the summer, the officer that's there all the time, he goes and has a holiday and what have you. But of course, a crazy place, especially in terms of things like that corroboration thing I mentioned.
Yeah.
So, for example, the officer that was permanently based there, he was there with his family. They had a police house, and literally you went through a door in the hall into the police office, one cell, one office. And if the officer needed corroboration for anything, for example, doing a breath, an intoximeter procedure, he would call his wife through to corroborate it. Or if there was a prisoner and they needed food, then the wife was actually given an allowance per meal to come through with a dinner on a plate.
Fantastic.
It's so crazy, but I mean, great communities. I did my 6 months there, and then within 12 months, I had applied and been successful for a post in a place called Kames near Dunoon, which again, just tiny community. It was only me and another officer living in the area. But, spent 3 years there, great times. I mean, very much community-based policing. The difficulty is you've not got the volume of crime and you've not got the violence that you would have in Glasgow. And so a lot of police officers kind of look down on it. But what they forget is you never get away from the job. No. If you're off duty in your own home, and somebody can't find you in the office, they're going to knock on the door of your home. If you're at the newsagents getting a paper, clearly not on duty because you're not in uniform, people will still come up and start complaining about, someone's built their fence 6 inches too far over into the ground and what you're going to do about it. Which, is part of the course, but so it is that sort of steady drip, drip, drip that you never get away from it. I loved it. It was a great place to live, beautiful scenery, lovely people. But yeah, so I did that for 3 years. And then, like I say, a couple of corporate jobs. But the Glasgow North and East was very much a rubber band area for me throughout my service.
When you're on the islands, I suppose you'd have to use a lot of discretion and common sense whilst you're carrying out your policing there, where you wouldn't need to whilst pounding the streets of Glasgow because you had that support and the backup. Mm-hmm. You're doing 2 different styles of policing in one organisation.
Yeah. But you build, so for example, the officer that was permanently based on Fairie, he built up his trust during the easy times. So he was a churchgoer. He would record the church services, and then on the Monday he would drive around all the old dears that couldn't get to the service and give them tape recordings of it. And so he was getting all the gossip off of those old dears. Brilliant. And you know what? Those people are really influential in island communities.
Yeah.
But he would do, he'd referee the football matches. He ran a youth club on a Friday. He had a finger in every pie. Because he knew when push came to shove, this is what I have to draw on in terms of my report. And when he retired, Danny Latchley, not the police, but the Islanders recommended him for the Queen's Police Medal, and he got it, which was a lovely. Yeah, it was lovely to come from the Islanders as well. It didn't come from the organisation because the organisation probably wouldn't have a clue who he was. So that was nice. So that's what you do. That's how you build. You've got to sort of build up your trust. But
they could so destroy you as well, couldn't they? If you got it wrong and you were the wrong person for that job, you would soon know because you wouldn't be there 5 minutes.
Yeah, and you know what? And some officers do have. They have an incident with one particular individual where it goes badly wrong, and then it's really because of the nature of the communities and probably through no fault on the part of the officer. It's just one of those incidents. Someone's got out of hand, and it just goes wrong from there. And of course, the difficulty is your family's in that environment as well, and that's where it becomes really difficult. And I don't, I know of a few cops who good cops, really community minded, the right person in the right post just had a horrible incident one night with an individual in their community, and it eventually ended up in them and their family having to leave, which, it's one thing, affecting your own life, but it's when it starts to affect the lives of the people around you as well. That's where it is difficult.
Absolutely. So you get yourself promoted to inspector.
Mm-hmm.
What did you then do from sort of sergeant inspector to retirement? How did you prepare yourself to make the exit?
So I sat down at the 27-year stage, knowing I was going to do 30 years, and I sat down and I thought, right, what am I going to do in the last 3 years of my service to prepare myself? Because I knew I would want to do something. I knew I wasn't going to sort of just sit in the house and build Lego or whatever. And I went through a whole host of things. At one point I was going to do dog walking. I was thinking about, I've always had houses that have got really bad drains, so I've become a dab hand at clearing drains. So I thought I could do the jet clearing drain thing. But I finally settled on, so for the last 12 years of my service, I was a police negotiator.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with people in crisis. And I kind of settled on the path to become a cognitive behavioural therapist. So, I could see that there's clear overlap in terms of, I've developed sort of listening skills as a negotiator, and could I use them as a therapist? So I did a sort of gateway qualification, what they call in Scotland the Counselling Skills Certificate. Enjoyed it, got a lot from it. Thought, right, there's something in this, and then signed up for a course to become a CBT therapist, which I completed. It took me so I started it. It's a 2-year course, part-time, and I started it in my final year with Police Scotland, and I finished it when I was about 12 months out of Police Scotland.
Right. And you're busy?
Getting busy. I mean, I'm fortunate. I do a day job with Police Care UK at the moment, which is part-time, 3.5 days a week. It was a temporary contract, and I said, right, when it comes to the end of the contract, I'm going to knock it on the head, because I have actually started, I qualified last year as a therapist, and I've got a small handful of clients at the moment, kind of at my capacity, in terms of client numbers. But hopefully, once I finish the Police Care UK contract, I'll have capacity to do more. And I would recommend it. If there is anyone out there who's considering being a therapist, post-police or post-military, I would recommend it. I think it's difficult if you want to get a full-time career out of it. It's probably quite difficult, and it will take you quite a long time to build up a full-time list of clients. But I always knew I didn't want full-time. Yeah. I wanted to work for myself. I wanted part-time hours that I could flex depending on what was happening in my life. So this allows me to do that. But I get a lot of queries, and I would, if anyone's listening to this and wants to reach out, look me up on LinkedIn or Facebook or Google me. I'm pretty easy to track down. Just in terms of that, the path, I get a lot of queries about the path you have to take and the qualifications you need to set yourself up.
Well, we'll put all your links in the body.
Yeah.
Of a side thing called X-Job Services, where you can advertise on there for free. So if you want to stick your business on there, I'll send you the links for it. Yeah. But it's a repository for nice people, and a lot of people will go to it. It's like with the we've got police charities on there. I'd like to get all the charities on there because there are quite a few.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll send you the links.
For sure. Yeah.
What do you actually do for Police Care UK?
So Police Care UK are leading. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what Police Care UK do. So Police Care UK, they look after police officers, staff, and their families. So they do a wide range of things. But one of the things that they do is if you're having a particularly hard time as a result of your police work, then they can, and you can't get help within your force for whatever reason, then they will help by organising some therapy for you.
Right.
Now, at the moment, they do that through a third-party provider, but the evidence has come back that police officers and staff would prefer to have therapists that understand the policing world,
Yeah.
and have experience of that sort of client group. So Police Care UK, we've teamed up with the Ambulance Staff Charity, Firefighters Charity, and they've got funding from the Royal Foundation to set up a pilot, and my part to set up what they call a network of emergency service therapists.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so my job has been to get that list of therapists that have experience of dealing with clients, either because they've got that lived experience in those roles,
Yep.
or they just, they've worked for providers who've focused on emergency service contracts. So we've got that list, we've got it in a database, and then very shortly we're going to start allocating beneficiaries that come through Police Care UK to therapists from that list. And it means when those beneficiaries are speaking to a therapist, they are confident, they should have some confidence that the person will know what it's like being an emergency service and the challenges that brings. So it's a great project,
Yeah.
and really hoping it'll deliver. Because there's a lot, unfortunately, when you can, at the moment, Police Care UK, I think we're doing something like 300 hours of therapy a month for people. And now, when you bear in mind that one of the criteria for the charity to provide help is it's got to be work related. So you think there's something like 100 or so officers and members of staff and families who are failing to get help through their own force, having to come to Police Care UK, and we are providing it. So there's such a desperate need for it. I listened to your interview with Leslie Kirk,
Yes.
Strathclyde officer, who, what a horrible time she had.
There was no happy ending to that.
No.
Interview. Yeah.
But the thing that got me as I was listening to it, obviously, the Leslie story is after a Rangers Celtic football match, getting badly assaulted, being let down by our supervisor on the night, but then, to add, to compound that whole incident, then to be really ignored, or matters made worse by the organisation. And certainly the organisation, Police Scotland, are better, I would like to think, now than they were in Leslie's time, but still a lot of people falling through that net, unfortunately.
And I think it's absolutely brilliant that they're going to use people that have been in those situations to do the counselling, because to say to somebody, I know how you feel, is such a massive relief to the recipient, because there's that common ground. Yeah, I can have. I've had many occasion as a police officer where I wanted to say, I know you feel, but I didn't know how they felt because I'd never gone through that. And I think that's absolutely superb. And if anybody from Police Care UK wants to come on and speak to me, then please point them in my direction, because I'll quite happily talk to somebody from there as well. Well, how did you get into writing the book?
Yeah, so remember that job I had about protective equipment?
Yes. And
I realised then we're not really doing enough about giving cops communication skills training. We send them once a year on a officer safety training day, and it's all about hit people this way with the baton, put the handcuffs on that way, hold them like this. And there was nothing at that time about de-escalation or communication skills. Now, it has got better, but that's what started my interest. And it led to me becoming a police negotiator, which I did for 12 years. Absolutely great role. But it sort of it started me on a sort of course of study really about what police officers could do. And I also became a CBT therapist, so I was picking up sort of communication skills from that. So when I left, I decided to try and get that written down. So I've developed a model called the SIMPLE model. I'll go through it very quickly. So the model is S, stop, and that's about de-escalating yourself, because you're not going to de-escalate anyone unless you've de-escalated yourself first. And that can be hard if you've had an adrenaline-filled drive to a station where you're hearing your colleagues absolutely crying for help. Yeah. So you need to get control of that. But there's other things in there about then de-escalating the situation, the person you're talking to. Introduce yourself. I've seen so many conversations over the years where someone might say, "Hi, I'm PC Andy Fairie from Shelton Police Office," or "I'm PC 1234," or "You can read my shoulder number if you want to know who I am." And unfortunately, see it all the time, and there are reasons why that conversation is more than likely going to go south.
Yeah.
Make it possible to listen. So you're thinking there about physical barriers. Do you really need to stand in the middle of the road in the pouring rain, take a statement from someone? What are the emotional barriers? Are people worried about being labelled a grass? Are they worried that they won't be taken seriously? So you need to address them. P, purpose, because people get derailed on purpose. People will, how often have you had an argument with someone, your other half probably, and you've been telling somebody about it the next day, and they say, "What was the argument about?" And you say, "Oh, it was about not cleaning the fridge." But it really wasn't about not cleaning the fridge. It was about everything else that's going on. But you know what? We spoke about cleaning the fridge. Well, you're not going to sort things out talking about cleaning the fridge. So be clear on the purpose. Listen. That's where those active listening skills are so important, and that leads you to empathise. So you're demonstrating, you've listened to someone, you're demonstrating, okay, I don't agree with you, but here's where I understand what your position is. So yeah, just take that, and I take folk through that simple model. I also, there's a chapter in there because I've been asked a lot over the years by officers how to deal with that suicidal person on a bridge or someone that's in crisis. So some pointers there, but there's also in the book quite a bit about talking to each other and talking to colleagues about suicide, because unfortunately police officers are particularly at risk of completing suicide, and we don't talk to each other about it. We really do everything to avoid talking to each other about it. But the research shows that when people do have those conversations, it significantly reduces that risk. So that's the book. It's been out since last year. Listening skills for effective policing. The publisher chose the title. I really don't like the title. It's very wordy, but lots of good reception to it. And next week, actually, going down to London, doing a little presentation to some CID or trainee CID officers, and hoping that I can start sort of trying to sort of like a sort of one-to-one person workshop type thing. So yes, it's gone really well.
Fantastic. It's interesting because I don't know what it's like up there, because here Samart Rowley has regaled the fact that he has been instrumental in the removal, or one of those who removed the canteens. Now for me, and in fact Sharon McCrossan, who came out today, she lives not far from you. We were talking about the canteen culture. You need to have a canteen culture. You need to, because if I'm sitting opposite you every single day, I will notice changes in you. If I'm working close to you, I will start to understand, what your domestic circumstances are like, what financially. I mean, police officers are open books.
Yeah.
But of course, if we're not sitting opposite each other, then we don't get to find out. And I think a lot of these issues around mental health and the suicidal thoughts could be alleviated so easily just by having that canteen culture again and getting people back into that team ethos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. And over the years, when I started in Coventry, half the shift would come in at a certain particular time. You'd all have sort of your dinner, your breakfast, whatever together. And then you'd scatter and go back on. And it was that sort of pressure valve type thing, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Over the years, actually, because I was towards the end of my time in response with Police Scotland, cops would be lucky if they got what they call a peace break in Scotland.
Yeah.
And it really annoys me because, it's actually, police officers have working time regulations applied to them in the same way as any other occupation. And working time regulations say you get a refreshment break roughly halfway through the shift. And what annoys me is, we know, because cops have to update their status continually throughout their shift. And we know we could find out very easily, certainly in Scotland, through the command and control system, you can find out who hasn't got a refreshment break today. But you know what? Police Scotland doesn't gather any data about that. I suspect because if it did, it would suddenly realise we're on the anvil here for not complying with working time regulations. And as you say, just that fact that you don't get a break at any point, you don't get a chance to sit down and have a chat with your mates, there's a corresponding rise in mental health issues and suicide.
Can I just take you back very briefly? As a negotiator, 12 years, you must have worked on some very interesting jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But were there jobs where you walked away feeling unfulfilled? I mean, there's lots of successes, but how do you feel when there isn't a success, or was everything?
Well, it's a team game. I mean, one of the incidents I had, I think it was the second last incident I went to as a negotiator. It was a clear example of that. So I remember it was a Saturday morning. I'm coming back from the park run. I've got the negotiator van because I'm on call for negotiating, and I get the call 10:30. Andy, can you go down to Dumfries? Chap on an aqueduct. He's going to throw himself off at such and such a time. Okay, not a problem. Are there any negotiators in Dumfries? Because it's a long way away from Glasgow. No, one's kayaking in a loch, one's off sick. I was in the middle of COVID as well, so one's got COVID. So get a team together from Glasgow and we start heading down. Takes us about 2.5 hours to drive there on blue lights.
Wow.
It's a long way. And really frustrating because as I'm driving down, I've got an airwave terminal, but I can't get any information about what's happening at the scene. I realise when I get to the location, the reason for that is because there's hardly any mobile phone coverage at all. So, but we get there. Chap's still on, me and another chap. We're the first two there. And it's normally, and this guy's on a viaduct. Unfortunately, the only area we can access is below the viaduct, and he's just chucking stones at everyone and anyone. So normally we would wait till there's public order officers there with shields, but there weren't any, and it didn't look as if any were coming. I couldn't quite understand how I could get there from Glasgow, but they couldn't get shields from Dumfries somewhere, but they couldn't. But we're getting close to the time where the guy says he's going to jump off. So we think we're going to have to go and speak to him. So to be fair, we go out, Colin's in front, he's number one, I'm number two, and we just get the stones thrown at us. Colin, the other negotiator, gets a right sore, takes a stone right on the arm, and it draws blood, sore. So he's take cover, and I think, right, that didn't work very well. He had his, the chap that was on the viaduct had brought his camper van there. So I said, right, well, what we'll do, we'll do the same thing, but we'll talk from behind his camper van, because he'll not throw stones at his camper van. He'll not want to damage that. How wrong was I? Of course, because he's killing himself. He's not bothered about his camper van. No. And that was a real wake up call for me, that this is, this chap is ticking all the boxes, including not being bothered about his own property, because he's not coming back to the camper van because he's killing himself. We managed, and fair play to Colin. Colin's, he's already taken a sore one on the arm, he just kept getting out there, me standing very bravely behind him. And eventually we were able to talk through this chap's deadline, didn't throw himself off when he said he was going to throw himself off. And we're just then in for the long haul. So we are there till, it was a hot day as well, middle of summer, middle of nowhere. Communications with the control room, really difficult. Horrible incident. We eventually decide we're going to have to get a second team out here and hand over to a second team. Which happens, that team turn up about 8, 9 o'clock at night. And bear in mind, this chap has told us to F off throughout the whole day. And whenever we've tried to talk to him, there've been some glimmers of hope, but generally, whenever we try and talk to him, we just, a volley of abuse, a volley of stones. But when he finds out that we're leaving, he becomes even more unhappy.
Oh, no.
And you say, well, come on, you can't win. And, every time we try and talk to us, you chuck stones at us, but we're going. And we had to go because myself and the other two, they were beat. They had absolutely poured everything into that.
Yeah.
For 6, 7, 8 hours. They were totally beat. I walked back, as it happens, I walked back to the negotiator van because we're going to use that to get back up the road. Having parked it a huge distance away, but of course I haven't parked it far away enough. Boy, could this guy throw stones. So as we're driving away, we end up getting 3 of the windows put in on the van. So that presents us with problems because we know how we're going to get back home. But we do. And it is that thing of coming away from an incident that you've not resolved. You've had to hand it over to someone else. And as I'm going back up the road, the control room can now get in touch with me and are not happy with me because they actually had other incidents that they were looking for a negotiator to go to, and I'm the on-call coordinator and they couldn't get me. So they're just not happy. Go to bed, fully expecting to get another phone call at 4 or 5 in the morning to go back to Dumfries for this chap. As it happened, I did get a call at 4 or 5 in the morning, but it was to let me know, right, we've managed to persuade this chap to come down. So, and the whole thing about being a negotiator, it's not about having an ego and thinking I was able to talk that person down. On that occasion, I would have loved to have been the person that led the team that got that chap down, but it wasn't for us. Somebody and the other team did it, and I spoke to the other team to try and say, right, well, what was it that persuaded them to come down? To be honest, I think it was more time than anything else, and it was getting cold and late, and I think whatever substances that male had taken had well and truly worn off by that point. But still, so you do feel unsatisfied about it because you haven't got that successful resolution. But of course, success is actually measured in different ways. It would have been a great success for that person to come down unharmed. But success is actually giving other people time to get in place. Given whether that's a firearms incident, giving that firearms team time to get together and get a plan so that if they do have to storm the building, they've got as good a plan as they can get. In that instance, it was enough time so that we could get a fully refreshed team in and they could try something else. As it happens, the chap concerned did come down. He was actually sectioned under the Mental Health Act and spent some time getting help for that. And eventually wrote a letter to the officer with Colin with the sore arm. So there was some, months later, there was some satisfaction that there was, the chap did appear to be genuinely regretful and grateful for our actions on the day.
And there are, some brilliant people like you out there, and these are the roles that the public don't get to hear about. Tell me about your podcast.
The SFQ podcast, yeah. I mean,
SFQ stand for?
I see. Again, I'm not very good at naming things, so I don't particularly like the name of my book, and I think the name of my podcast was probably wrong. So when I was in West Midlands, we had the phrase SFQ, which was stupid effing question.
Yeah.
Because you would be stood at a cordon with lots of blue tape, car across the road. It's a cordon, and you would get no end of members of the public coming up asking you SFQs like, "Can I walk down this road?" No, there's tape and there's a police car. Of course you can't. So SFQ, stupid effing question, but I think it's in common parlance in West Midlands. I'm told it's common parlance in the Met, but I'm not too sure about that now. But because it was in my mind, I thought that'd be a good name for a podcast where you're asking people questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it turns out that hardly anybody in Scotland uses that term SFQ podcast, so it probably wasn't that great. But I mean, I've always loved podcasts. I used to have a dog, walk it twice a day, listen to podcasts when I was doing that. I always thought, oh, it'd be great to do my own podcast. And I could never quite decide what the subject would be. And then someone said, why don't you just do what you know about, which is policing?
Yeah.
So, yeah, just after I retired, I started this podcast, and it's the view of policing from Scotland. Not necessarily of Scotland. And, I do interview quite a few people from English forces and beyond. You know what? I describe myself as a hobbyist podcaster. It's a way. I did realise after a while it was probably I was grieving for my police service and my police life, and it's a way of keeping in touch with police colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely.
To keep that going. But I enjoy doing it. I kind of took a bit of a break over Christmas. Well, I didn't take a bit of a break, just everything was busy, everything else over Christmas. Looking to get back into it. And it's generally, I'm trying to extend the people that I speak to, but it's generally people that have got a police background or interest. What's drawn them into that career? Not too dissimilar to our conversation. What's drawn them into that career? What was their career like? What were the highlights? What were the lowlights? I'm always fascinated and interested, because it relates to me, about how they've adapted to retirement or leaving the police.
Yeah.
So I've enjoyed it. Again, it's got good. It's quite niche, but it still keeps me in. It seems to get sort of quite good feedback when I get it, and yeah, it's a hobbyist podcast, and I'm going to keep it at that level. It keeps me with a sort of bit of an interest in policing, allows me to talk to police people about police things, and as long as I enjoy doing it, yeah, keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all hobbyists. We are.
I think you're looking less of a hobbyist than me.
No. We are all hobbyists. I did one with a guy called Terry Stone, and he's got all the gear, they've got all the cameras. I can't afford that, no disrespect to, and there's some great people out there that do some great, but we are all hobbyists, and but it is fun, and it's lovely talking to great people like yourself, and I haven't had a disappointing person yet. I enjoy conversation, and I think that makes a hell of a difference.
Yeah, and there's some great stories out there. Even I consider myself a very average police officer in terms of the career I had. And it was only when I sort of sat down to sort of write down some of my stories, I realised I'd actually forgotten a lot of what I'd done. But it's like you say, every conversation I've had, you just get an absolutely great depth and breadth of stories and experience from people. And it's just that, and even the most, dare I say it, average police officers, and a lot of the people I've been speaking to have been far above average, but even the most average police officers, you've got some absolutely great tales to tell.
Yeah, they have, because they were the first people at a murder scene. They were the ones that carried out the arrest. They were the first people at whatever incident. These are great people. What they don't do is they don't understand their value, and they don't understand what they've actually done in their 30-year career and what impact that had on their local society, on their local community.
Yeah.
And it's about self-worth, and sometimes they don't have that worth. They don't understand that, and it's brilliant. What do you do in your spare time? I see a load of medals behind you, and you spoke about park runs. Is that your passion?
It used to be. I used to do a lot of running and trail running, and that's where the medals come. But I haven't done any for a while. I picked up an injury, and I just kind of got out of the habit and the routine of going for a run. I am literally in the middle of trying to get back into it with my Couch to 5K app on my phone. So, but to be honest, it's probably the same as a lot of particularly retired police officers. I am that cliche of I don't know where I find time to work. So I've got the time. I've got the work for Police Care UK. I've got the therapist private practice. Got the book and try to sort of develop that into a sort of workshop roadshow type thing. At the same time, 12 months ago, me and my partner and my daughter, we moved into our new house. It's not a new house, it's an old house, which leaves a hell of a lot of work. So next month, because I've got I've had so much bother trying to get a plasterer. So I'm going to next month do a 5-day plastering course. And that will hopefully give me the skills to do my own plastering. So, yeah. And then just the whole, 12-year-old daughter and running her around and clubs here, there and everywhere. So busy. But I imagine most retired police officers and military veterans are probably exactly the same.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Well, look, before we conclude this interview, I have to give you the opportunity to add, alter, or correct anything that you said in your statement today.
Am I getting out?
Mate, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah.
I'll let you get to your day. Lovely to speak to you. Keep in touch.
Well, yeah, definitely.
All right, mate. God bless.
Take care. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Speak to you soon. Cheers. Thank you.
See you, mate.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.